I never thought my own brother would try to exile me from our family over Sunday dinner, especially not in my own dining room. Derek sat across from me at the mahogany table I had saved 6 months to buy his fork halfway to his mouth when he dropped his bombshell. We've been talking and we're cleaning house, kicking out the useless people in this family, and honestly, Monique, you're first on the list. My parents actually laughed as he continued, "The only thing you're good for is your money anyway." I set down my wine glass, looked him straight in the eye, and said calmly, "Perfect. Then start packing your things because this is my house." The silence that followed my response was deafening. Derek's face went white as my parents stopped laughing, suddenly realizing the weight of what had just happened. My mother, Carol, cleared her throat nervously, while my father, James, pushed his mashed potatoes around his plate, avoiding eye contact. Derek recovered first, letting out a forced chuckle. "Come on, Monique, don't be so dramatic. You know what I meant." But I did know what he meant, and that was exactly the problem. For the past hour, Derek had been listing my supposed failures like he was reading from a carefully prepared script. No husband at 32, no children, no real relationships that lasted more than a few months, just money from what he called my little computer thing that I was apparently too selfish to share properly with family. "Actually, I don't think I do know what you meant," I replied, standing up and beginning to clear the plates. "Why don't you explain it to me?" Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Look, all I'm saying is that family should support family. You've got all this success, this big house, but what do you really contribute? You show up to dinner once a month, write a check here and there. But where's the real support? Where's the emotional investment?" The irony of his words hit me like a physical blow. This house, with its open-concept kitchen and dining area that could seat 12 people comfortably, had been purchased specifically for these monthly gatherings. I had spent every weekend for 2 months painting these walls myself, choosing warm earth tones that would make everyone feel welcome. The furniture, the art, even the expensive sound system that played soft jazz during our meals, all chosen to create the perfect space for bringing our scattered family together. Emotional investment. I repeated, slowly scraping leftover pot roast into containers. That's interesting coming from someone who moved back from California last year with nothing but 2 suitcases and a sob story about needing a fresh start. "That's different," Derek snapped. "I was going through a rough patch. Everyone hits bumps in the road." What he didn't mention was that I had quietly paid his security deposit and first 3 months of rent at his apartment across town, or the fact that I had been covering his car payment for the past 8 months after he defaulted on the loan. These weren't gestures I had advertised to the family. I had handled them discreetly the way I thought siblings should help each other without fanfare or expectation of public gratitude. My parents finally stood up, clearly uncomfortable with the tension that had settled over what should have been a pleasant family evening. "Well, this got heavy fast," James muttered, reaching for his jacket. "Maybe we should all just sleep on this." After they left, Derek lingered in the kitchen while I loaded the dishwasher. "You're really going to hold this against me?" he asked. "I was just trying to motivate you to be more involved. The family needs leadership, and you've got the resources to provide it." "Leadership," I said, closing the dishwasher door with perhaps more force than necessary. "Like the leadership you showed when you told Cousin Amy that I thought her wedding was a waste of money, or when you convinced Uncle Robert that I was too busy with my fancy lifestyle to visit him in the hospital." Derek's expression flickered with something that might have been guilt, but he quickly covered it with defensiveness. "People talk, Monique. If you're getting a bad reputation, maybe you should look at your own behavior instead of blaming everyone else." After he finally left, I noticed his laptop bag sitting by the front door. In his hurry to escape the uncomfortable conversation, he had forgotten it completely. I picked it up, intending to text him about coming back for it, when the screen lit up with a notification from a group chat. The preview showed my name and the words, "50 grand" in the same message. My finger hovered over the power button. I shouldn't look. This was his private conversation. But my name was right there. And after the evening I had just endured, I felt entitled to know what he was saying about me when I wasn't around. The group chat included Derek and three of our male cousins, Tyler, Brandon, and Marcus. The conversation thread went back several weeks, and as I scrolled through it, a cold feeling settled in my stomach. Derek had been building up to asking me for $50,000. Not for the business venture he had mentioned to Tyler, not for the investment opportunity he had described to Brandon, and certainly not for the family emergency he had hinted at to Marcus. According to messages he thought would never see the light of day, Derek owed serious money to some very serious people in Las Vegas. The kind of people who didn't accept payment plans or consider family obligations a valid excuse for delayed payment. The worst part wasn't even the deception about the money itself. It was the way he had been systematically undermining my reputation with our extended family for months, setting up a narrative where I was selfish and disconnected, so that when he finally asked for the money, everyone would pressure me to give it to him. He had been playing a long game, and I had been completely oblivious to it. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed Derek's words and the casual way my parents had laughed along with his assessment of my worth to the family. By 7 a.m, I was in my home office with a cup of coffee and Derek's laptop, determined to understand exactly how deep this manipulation went. What I found was worse than I had imagined. Derek hadn't just been preparing to ask me for money. He had been actively destroying my relationships with our family members for the better part of a year, creating a carefully constructed narrative that painted me as arrogant, selfish, and emotionally unavailable. In his email, I found correspondence with a credit monitoring service. Somehow, Derek had managed to use my address on several credit applications, listing me as a character reference without my knowledge. When I dug deeper into my own financial records, I discovered that my credit score had taken several small hits over the past few months from inquiries I had never authorized. I called my parents around 9, hoping that in the light of day they might have some perspective on the previous evening. Instead, Carol answered with a tone that was distinctly cooler than usual. "I hope you're calling to apologize for last night," she said without preamble. "Derek was just trying to help you see things from a different perspective, and you completely overreacted." "Help me see what perspective exactly." "Monique, honey, we love you, but you have to admit you've become a bit self-centered since your business took off. Derek has been telling us about all the little things, how you've changed, how you don't seem to care about anyone's problems unless they affect you directly." I felt my chest tighten. "What little things?" "Well, like how you never ask about anyone else's life anymore, how you show up to family events but spend the whole time on your phone, how you make comments about people's choices that come across as judgmental." None of this was true. I made a point of asking about everyone's lives, remembering details about their jobs, their relationships, their health concerns. I kept my phone in my purse during family gatherings specifically to avoid seeming distracted, and I had never made judgmental comments about anyone's choices, certainly not to their faces. "Mom, when have I ever done any of those things? Can you give me a specific example?" There was a long pause. "Well, Derek mentioned that you said Amy's wedding was too expensive and that she was being wasteful with money she didn't have." "I never said that. I've never even talked to Derek about Amy's wedding." "Well, that's what he told us, and honestly, it fits with the pattern of behavior we've been seeing." The pattern of behavior they had been seeing was actually a pattern of lies Derek had been telling them. I realized that every negative thing they believed about me had come through Derek carefully delivered over months of conversations, where he positioned himself as the concerned brother, trying to help our parents understand why I seemed so different lately. "Has Derek asked you for money recently?" I asked. "What does that have to do with anything? Has he—" Another pause longer this time. "He mentioned that he was having some trouble getting back on his feet, but he didn't ask for anything specific. He said he would never want to be a burden on the family like some people." Like some people, meaning me apparently. After I hung up, I sat in my office chair staring at the wall for a long time. Derek had managed to convince our parents that I was selfish, while simultaneously positioning himself as the considerate son who would never ask for help. Meanwhile, I had been paying his bills and covering his expenses without anyone knowing about it because I thought that was what family did for each other. I decided to call Aunt Ruth, my father's sister, who lived about 20 minutes away in a senior community. Ruth had always been my favorite relative, the one person in the family who seemed to genuinely enjoy my company without any expectations or hidden agendas. If Derek was spreading lies about me, surely Ruth would have noticed something off about his stories. "Oh, Monique." Ruth's voice brightened when she heard mine. "I was just thinking about you. Well, actually, I was thinking about Derek, but now that I have you on the phone, I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For the monthly checks, sweetheart. Derek told me they were your idea, but that you were too modest to take credit. He said you specifically asked him to handle the logistics because you didn't want me to feel like charity. It's such a thoughtful way to help me with the little extras that Medicare doesn't cover." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Monthly checks. "The $400 you send every month. Derek brings them by personally, usually with some little treat from that bakery downtown. Last month he brought those lemon bars you know I love, and he said you had specifically requested them. It was so sweet." I had been sending Ruth $400 every month for the past year and a half, but I had been mailing the checks directly to her with little notes about how much I loved her and wanted to make sure she was comfortable. Derek had been intercepting my mail, somehow taking credit for my gifts, and even forging responses from Ruth to make me think she was receiving my help and appreciating it. "Ruth, can I ask you something? Do you have any of the cards or notes that came with those checks?" Of course, I keep them all in a special box. Derek writes the sweetest little messages about how much the family loves me and wants to take care of me. "Would you like me to read you one? My hands were shaking as she rustled around looking for the box. When she started reading, I heard my own words coming back to me, but in Derek's handwriting. The personal details I had included in my notes, the inside jokes Ruth and I shared, the references to childhood memories only she and I would understand. Derek had been copying my letters word for word, rewriting them in his own hand and taking complete credit for my gesture of love and support. "Ruth, I need to see you. Can I come over this afternoon?" "Of course, dear. But you should know Derek is planning to stop by around 3. He's been so good about visiting regularly." Derek's regular visits were beginning to make sense now. He wasn't just stealing credit for my financial support. He was actively managing my relationship with Ruth, controlling the information flow in both directions to maintain his fiction. "Actually, I'd like to surprise him. Would it be okay if I arrived a little early?" Ruth's apartment in the Sunset Manor community was exactly the kind of cozy space I had imagined when I started sending her the monthly checks. Warm lighting, comfortable furniture, and walls covered with family photos spanning decades of holidays, graduations, and celebrations. She greeted me at the door with her usual enthusiasm, but there was something different in her demeanor, a careful politeness that hadn't been there before. "I'm so glad you came by," she said, leading me to her small dining table. "Derek always says how busy you are with your important work, how hard it is for you to find time for family visits." Another lie to add to the growing collection. I visited Ruth at least twice a month, usually bringing groceries and spending the afternoon helping her with small household tasks or just talking about her week. Derek, as far as I knew, hadn't visited her more than a handful of times since moving back to town. "Ruth, I want to show you something." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, scrolling to the recurring payment I had set up for her monthly support. "Can you tell me what you see here?" She put on her reading glasses and studied the screen carefully. "It looks like banking information. I'm not very good with these computer things, dear. This is a record of the money I've been sending you every month for the past year and a half. $400 sent directly from my account to yours on the 15th of each month." Ruth's face went pale, but Derek said, "He told me the money came from him, that he was trying to help me stay independent. He said you thought I should consider moving to a less expensive place." "I never said that. I've never wanted you to move anywhere. I love knowing you're happy and comfortable here." She was quiet for a long time, staring at the phone screen. Finally, she got up and walked to a small desk in the corner of the room, returning with a shoebox full of cards and notes. "Derek asked me to write thank you cards for the money," she said slowly. "He said you preferred written notes to phone calls because you could keep them for your records. He told me exactly what to write in each one." She handed me a stack of cards in her distinctive handwriting. Each one was addressed to Derek, thanking him for his generosity, his thoughtfulness, his commitment to family. Reading them felt like looking at a funhouse mirror version of the relationship I thought Ruth and I had been building. "There's something else," Ruth said quietly. "Derek borrowed $3,000 from me last month. He said it was to help pay for medical bills you couldn't afford, something about an emergency surgery that your insurance didn't cover completely. I hadn't had any medical emergencies. I hadn't even been to the doctor for anything more serious than a routine checkup in over a year. He was very emotional about it," Ruth continued. "He said you were too proud to ask for help directly, but that you really needed the support. He promised to pay me back as soon as your insurance came through." Derek had stolen $3,000 from our elderly aunt by using my name and fabricating a medical crisis. This wasn't just manipulation or family drama anymore. This was fraud, plain and simple. "Ruth, Derek lied to you about everything. I'm not having financial problems. I never needed money for medical bills, and I certainly never asked him to borrow money from you on my behalf." She covered her face with her hands. "I feel so foolish. But he was so convincing, and he knew so many details about your life, about things only family would know. The details he knew came from the personal notes I had been sending her every month, the intimate thoughts and updates I had shared because I trusted her with them. Derek had been using my own words to build credibility for his lies. "There's one more thing you should know," Ruth said, reaching into the box again. "Derek asked me not to mention his visits to anyone else in the family. He said some people might not understand his commitment to helping you and me, that they might get jealous or try to interfere." Derek had been systematically isolating Ruth from the rest of the family while simultaneously isolating me from her. Any conversation that might have revealed his deception had been carefully prevented through strategic manipulation of both sides. As if summoned by our conversation, there was a knock at the door. Ruth glanced at the clock and then at me with a worried expression. "That must be Derek. He's always very punctual." "Let him in," I said. "I think it's time we all had an honest conversation." But when Ruth opened the door, Derek took one look at me sitting at his grandmother's dining table and immediately understood that his carefully constructed house of cards was falling down. "What are you doing here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I'm visiting my aunt," I said calmly. "The same aunt I've been supporting financially for over a year, the same aunt you've been lying to about where that support was coming from." Derek looked from me to Ruth, calculating his options. "I think there's been some confusion here. Monique, maybe we should discuss this privately." "No confusion at all. Ruth, would you mind showing Derek the thank you cards you wrote, the ones addressed to him for my money?" The color drained from Derek's face as Ruth silently handed him the stack of cards. He didn't even pretend to read them. "Look, I can explain this. It's complicated, but I was just trying to help coordinate things. You're always so busy, and I thought it would be easier if I handled the logistics." "What about the $3,000 you borrowed for my fake medical emergency?" Derek sat down heavily in one of Ruth's chairs, all pretense abandoned. "I was going to pay that back." "With what money? The $50,000 you were planning to ask me for to cover your gambling debts." Ruth gasped. "Gambling debts?" "Derek owes money to some very dangerous people in Las Vegas," I explained. "He's been setting up this whole elaborate scheme to make me look bad to the family so everyone would pressure me to give him the money when he finally asked for it." Derek didn't deny it. He just sat there staring at his hands while the weight of his deception settled over the room like a heavy blanket. "How long has this been going on?" Ruth asked quietly. "Almost 2 years," I said. "He's been intercepting my letters to you, forging thank you cards in your name, and spreading lies about me to everyone in the family, all while positioning himself as the caring nephew who was just looking out for your best interests." Ruth walked over to Derek and gently took his hand. Sweetheart, why didn't you just ask for help? Why all the lies? For a moment, Derek looked like he might break down completely. Because asking for help means admitting I messed up again. It means facing the fact that I'm 35 years old and I still can't get my life together. It was easier to make Monique look bad than to make myself look good. It was the first honest thing he had said in months, maybe years. But understanding his motivation didn't excuse what he had done to our family, to Ruth, or to me. Derek, you need to leave, I said finally. And you need to stay away from Ruth until you can figure out how to have honest relationships with people. He stood up slowly, looking like a man who had aged 10 years in the past hour. At the door, he turned back to both of us. I really was going to pay back the money, he said. And I really do care about Ruth. I don't know how to do things the right way anymore. After he left, Ruth and I sat in silence for a while. Finally, she spoke. I should have known something was wrong. The Derek I've known since he was a little boy wouldn't have been so calculating about family relationships, but the stories he told were so detailed, so believable. He's good at manipulation, I said. I think he's been practicing for a long time. Ruth reached over and squeezed my hand. Thank you for being honest with me, and thank you for all the support over the past year. It really has made such a difference in my life, even if I didn't know where it was actually coming from. As I drove home that evening, I realized that Derek's betrayal ran much deeper than just stealing credit for my financial support. He had systematically destroyed my relationships with family members by creating a false narrative about who I was and what I valued. The question now was how many other people believed his version of me and whether those relationships could be salvaged. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Derek's manipulation had been comprehensive, but it had also been systematic, which meant I could trace it back through our family network and undo the damage piece by piece. I started with a list of every family member who might have been influenced by Derek's lies, then began making phone calls. My first call was to cousin Sarah, who had gotten married 6 months ago in what Derek had supposedly told everyone was a wasteful display of excess that I had criticized. Sarah and I had been close growing up, but our relationship had become notably cooler over the past year. "Oh, hi, Monique," Sarah said when she answered, her voice carefully neutral. "How are you?" "I'm doing well, but I'm calling because I think there might have been some miscommunication about your wedding. I heard that Derek told people I had negative things to say about it, and I wanted to clarify that directly with you." There was a long pause. "He said you thought it was too expensive and that I was being irresponsible with money I didn't have. It really hurt my feelings, honestly." "Sarah, I never said anything like that to Derek or to anyone else. I thought your wedding was beautiful and I was honored to be included. Do you remember what I wrote in the card I gave you?" Another pause. "Actually, I don't think I received a card from you. Derek said you had been really busy and might not have time to write personal notes for everyone anymore." I had spent 2 hours writing a heartfelt card for Sarah, sharing memories of our childhood friendship, and expressing how happy I was to see her find love with Marcus. The card had included a check for $500 and a gift certificate to their favorite restaurant. "Sarah, I absolutely gave you a card. It was in a cream-colored envelope, and I handed it to you personally during the receiving line. There was a check inside." "I never got anything like that. Are you sure you gave it to me and not to someone else to pass along?" The pieces clicked into place. Derek had been at the wedding, positioned near the gift table, offering to help collect cards and presents for the overwhelmed bride and groom. He had intercepted my gift, kept the money, and told Sarah I hadn't bothered to give her anything personal. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. How many of the negative things you've heard about me came directly from conversations with me, and how many came through Derek?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call might have dropped. Finally, Sarah spoke in a much quieter voice. "All of them came from Derek. You and I haven't really talked much this year, which I guess I attributed to you being, well, to what Derek said about you changing." "What exactly did Derek say about me changing?" "That success had gone to your head, that you made comments about people's life choices when you thought they couldn't hear you, that you had started seeing yourself as better than the rest of the family because you had money." Each accusation felt like a physical blow. Derek hadn't just been stealing money or taking credit for my generosity. He had been systematically destroying my character, creating a version of me that was arrogant, judgmental, and dismissive of the people I cared about most. My next call was to Uncle Bill, my mother's brother, who had been battling health issues for the past 2 years. Bill had always been one of my biggest supporters, the uncle who bragged about my business success to anyone who would listen. But when I called him, his greeting was noticeably reserved. "Uncle Bill, I wanted to check in and see how you're feeling. Mom mentioned that you had another doctor's appointment last week." "I'm managing," he said shortly. "Though I have to say, Monique, I was a little surprised by what Derek told me about your reaction to my job situation." "My reaction to what?" "When I got laid off from the plant. Derek said you called it pathetic that a man my age couldn't keep up with the younger workers, and that maybe I should have planned better for retirement." I felt sick. Uncle Bill had worked at the same manufacturing plant for 37 years before corporate restructuring eliminated his position 6 months before his planned retirement. It was a devastating blow to a man who had prided himself on his work ethic and reliability. "Uncle Bill, I never said anything like that. I was furious when I heard about the layoffs, and I thought the company's treatment of long-term employees was disgraceful. When did Derek tell you I said those things?" "About 3 months ago. He seemed reluctant to bring it up, said he probably shouldn't be repeating family gossip, but he thought I should know how people were talking about my situation." 3 months ago was right around the time I had been considering offering Uncle Bill a part-time consulting position with my company to help bridge the gap until his retirement benefits kicked in. But Derek's fictional comments had created a rift that made such an offer impossible without seeming patronizing or insincere. "Has Derek been visiting you regularly?" I asked. "Every few weeks. He's been very supportive, always asking how I'm doing, offering to help with odd jobs around the house. It's been nice having someone in the family who understands what it's like to struggle with employment issues." Derek had positioned himself as the empathetic family member who understood Uncle Bill's struggles, while painting me as the successful relative who looked down on anyone facing financial difficulties. It was a masterful manipulation that served multiple purposes. It made Uncle Bill grateful to Derek, it made me look heartless, and it prevented me from offering the kind of help that might have exposed Derek's lies. By the end of the day, I had made 8 phone calls and discovered a pattern that was both infuriating and impressive in its thoroughness. Derek had spent the better part of 2 years creating personalized lies for each family member, carefully crafted to match their insecurities and designed to make me seem like exactly the kind of person who would hurt them in their most vulnerable moments. To Sarah, I was the cousin who judged her financial decisions. To Uncle Bill, I was the niece who looked down on working-class struggles. To my parents, I was the daughter who had become too good for her raising. To Ruth, I was the family member who wanted her to give up her independence. But Derek's manipulation went beyond just making me look bad. He had been inserting himself into every narrative as the caring, understanding family member who was there to provide support and comfort. He had made himself indispensable to people who were struggling while making me seem irrelevant or harmful to their well-being. The most disturbing discovery came during my conversation with cousin Marcus, Sarah's husband. Marcus mentioned that Derek had been asking questions about my business, specifically about how much money I made and whether I had discussed expanding into other markets. He seemed really interested in the technical side of things, Marcus said. I told him I didn't know much about the specifics, but he kept asking about your client base and whether you had any investors or partners. Derek wasn't just planning to ask me for money. He was researching my business to understand exactly how much he could potentially get from me, and what story would be most likely to convince me to hand it over. The gambling debt might have been the immediate crisis, but Derek was thinking bigger than a one-time bailout. That night, I sat in my home office surrounded by notes from all the phone calls trying to map out the full scope of Derek's deception. What emerged was a picture of someone who had spent years studying our family dynamics, identifying each person's weaknesses and insecurities, and then exploiting those vulnerabilities to position himself as the hero of everyone's story except mine. The question now was what to do with this information. I could continue making phone calls, try to repair the relationships Derek had damaged through his lies. But that approach would be defensive, reactive, and time-consuming. It would also require each family member to confront the fact that they had been manipulated, which might be more embarrassing than they were willing to admit. Or I could take a more direct approach. Derek had been playing a long game, carefully building toward his ultimate goal of getting money from me, while destroying my reputation as insurance against my refusal. But games could be won by changing the rules, and I was starting to get some ideas about how to turn Derek's own strategy against him. I opened my laptop and started typing a message to our family group chat, the same one Derek had been using to coordinate his manipulation campaign. But instead of defensive explanations or angry accusations, I had something else in mind entirely. I spent 3 days crafting the perfect plan, studying Derek's own manipulation tactics and turning them back on him. If he wanted to play games with family dynamics, I would give him a game he wasn't prepared for. But first, I needed to set the stage carefully. My message to the family group chat was simple and seemingly innocent. Hi everyone, I've been doing some thinking after our family dinner last week, and Derek's comments really made me reflect on how I can be a better sister and family member. I'd like to host a special family appreciation dinner this Sunday to thank Derek for being such a caring brother and to discuss how I can better support everyone. Please let me know if you can make it. I'm especially hoping Derek will be there since this is really about honoring him. The responses came quickly. My parents were delighted that I was taking Derek's criticism to heart. Sarah and Marcus said they could attend. Uncle Bill seemed surprised, but pleased to be included. Ruth was excited about a family gathering, and Derek, clearly caught off guard by my apparent capitulation, agreed to come, while trying to sound graciously modest about being honored. But the family dinner was just the public stage for my real plan. While Derek thought he was being celebrated, I was quietly reaching out to each family member individually, using a strategy that Derek himself had taught me through his own manipulation playbook. My first private conversation was with Sarah. Instead of telling her about Derek's lies directly, I asked her to help me understand what I had done wrong. Sarah, I've been thinking about what Derek said about me changing, and I'm worried that my success has made me seem arrogant or judgmental. Can you help me understand specific things I've done that came across that way? I want to make sure I apologize properly to everyone I've hurt. Sarah was immediately uncomfortable. Oh, Monique, I don't think you need to apologize for anything specific. Maybe Derek was being a little harsh. No, I want to be honest about my mistakes. For example, Derek mentioned that I made comments about your wedding being too expensive. I don't remember saying that, but if I did, I want to take responsibility for it. Actually, now that I think about it, I don't think you ever said anything directly to me about the wedding. Derek just mentioned that you had concerns about the budget. Did Derek tell you about any other comments I made? I want to make sure I address everything at the dinner. By the end of our conversation, Sarah was starting to realize that all of her negative impressions of me had come through Derek, rather than from direct interactions with me. But instead of telling her this directly, I let her reach that conclusion on her own. I used the same approach with Uncle Bill, asking him to help me understand how my comments about his job situation had been hurtful so I could apologize properly. When he tried to recall the exact conversation where I had supposedly made those comments, he couldn't place it in a specific time or location. You know, I'm not sure you and I ever actually discussed my layoff directly, he admitted. I think Derek mentioned your reaction when he was updating me on family news. That's strange. I wonder if there was some kind of miscommunication. What exactly did Derek say? I said. As Uncle Bill repeated Derek's fictional version of my comments, I could hear him starting to question the story himself. The words didn't sound like something I would say, and when pressed for details about when and where this conversation supposedly took place, the whole narrative fell apart. My conversation with Ruth was different because she already knew about Derek's deception regarding the monthly checks. but I asked her to keep that information private until the family dinner, explaining that I wanted to address everything at once, so there couldn't be any more confusion or miscommunication. I think Derek has been struggling with some personal issues that have affected his judgment, I told her. I want to give him a chance to explain himself in front of the whole family before I make any decisions about how to handle the situation. Ruth agreed, though she was clearly concerned about the impact this revelation would have on family relationships. While I was having these individual conversations, I was also doing some additional research into Derek's activities. I contacted his landlord, introducing myself as his sister and asking about his lease status because I was considering helping him with some financial planning. "Oh, are you the sister he's always bragging about?" the landlord asked. "The successful one with the tech company. He talks about you all the time, says you're very generous with the family." "He talks about me all the time. He's mentioned that you help him out with rent sometimes, which is good because he's been struggling to make payments consistently. He's about 3 months behind right now, actually. I've been working with him because he says his sister might be able to help catch him up." Derek had been telling his landlord that I was already helping with his rent, probably to buy time and credibility for when he eventually asked me for money. The landlord naturally assumed that Derek's successful sister would cover any shortfalls, which explained why Derek hadn't been evicted despite months of non-payment. But the most disturbing discovery came from a conversation with Derek's ex-girlfriend Emma, whom I contacted through social media. Emma had dated Derek for about 6 months before they broke up 3 weeks ago, and she was surprisingly willing to talk about their relationship. "I should have known something was wrong when he started talking about buying a house," Emma said during our phone conversation. "He was always vague about his finances, but he kept talking about this big windfall that was coming, how his family was going to help him make some major investments." "What kind of investments?" "He said he was going to start his own business, something about consulting services. He had all these plans about office space and equipment, but when I asked for specifics, he would get defensive and say he didn't want to jinx it by talking too much about details." Emma also mentioned that Derek had been unusually interested in my personal life, asking her to help him research my business and my financial situation online. He said he wanted to understand what I was getting into by dating someone from a successful family, but looking back, it felt more like he was gathering intelligence. He knew way too much about your company's revenue and client base for someone who claimed to be just making conversation. The final piece of Derek's plan became clear during my last phone call of the week to a jewelry store downtown. Derek had apparently been in several times over the past month, looking at engagement rings and asking about payment plans. He mentioned that his sister owned a successful business and might be able to co-sign for a larger purchase, the sales associate told me. "We don't normally do co-signing for jewelry, but he was very persuasive about his family's financial stability." Derek hadn't just been planning to propose to Emma with money he intended to steal from me. He had been using my reputation and business success as collateral for purchases I knew nothing about. If his gambling debts hadn't created an immediate crisis, Derek might have eventually trapped me in financial obligations I had never agreed to, all while maintaining the fiction that I was a willing participant in his schemes. By Saturday night, I had all the pieces in place for Sunday's family appreciation dinner. Each family member had been gently guided toward questioning their negative assumptions about me without being directly told that Derek had lied to them. The stage was set for Derek to be confronted with his deception in a way that would be impossible for him to deny or deflect. But I had one more surprise planned, something that Derek couldn't possibly have anticipated. I'd contacted Emma and invited her to join us for dinner, ostensibly so Derek could introduce his girlfriend to the extended family. What Derek didn't know was that Emma had some very interesting information to share about his recent activities, information that would make his gambling debts seem like a minor problem compared to his other legal exposure. As I set the table Sunday afternoon arranging place cards for each family member, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting to Derek's manipulation. I wasn't defending myself against his lies or trying to prove my worth to people who should have known me better than to believe his stories in the first place. Instead, I was taking control of the narrative using Derek's own tactics against him and creating a situation where the truth would emerge naturally through his own words and actions. By the end of the evening, everyone would understand exactly who Derek really was and what he had been doing to our family. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock, and I opened it to find my parents standing on the front porch with nervous smiles and a bottle of wine. "We're so proud of you for organizing this," Carol said, hugging me tightly. "It takes real maturity to listen to criticism and respond with such grace." If only she knew what kind of grace I was really planning to display. By 6:30, everyone had arrived except Emma, who had texted that she was running a few minutes late. The dining room buzzed with comfortable conversation as family members caught up with each other, completely unaware that they were about to witness the complete destruction of Derek's carefully constructed web of lies. Derek sat at the head of the table looking unusually confident for someone who should have been nervous about being the center of attention. He had clearly convinced himself that my invitation was genuine, that I had actually taken his criticism to heart and was ready to acknowledge his superior understanding of family dynamics. Before we start eating, I announced, standing up with my wine glass, "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. As I mentioned in my message, this dinner is really about honoring Derek and the important role he's been playing in our family." Derek smiled modestly, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. He thought he had won. "Derek has been so concerned about my relationships with all of you," I continued, and I realized he was right that I needed to do a better job of understanding everyone's experiences. So I wanted to give each of you a chance to share how Derek has supported you recently, so we can all appreciate his dedication to family. I turned to Sarah first. "Sarah, why don't you start by telling us about how Derek helped you with your wedding?" Sarah glanced at Derek, then back at me, looking slightly confused. "Well, Derek was very supportive during the planning process. He offered to help with coordination and logistics." "That's wonderful. Can you tell us about any specific help he provided?" Actually, now that I think about it, I'm not sure Derek helped with any specific logistics. But he was always asking about the details, how things were going, whether we needed anything. Derek's smile was starting to look strained. "I tried to help where I could," he said quickly, "but Sarah and Marcus had everything well organized." "Of course they did. Uncle Bill, how about you? How has Derek supported you since your layoff?" Uncle Bill looked around the table uncertainly. "Derek's been very understanding about my situation. He visits regularly, always asks how I'm doing." "That's so thoughtful. Has he offered any practical assistance with your job search or financial planning?" "Well, no specific assistance, but it's been good to have someone to talk to who understands employment challenges." I nodded sympathetically. It must be especially meaningful to have family support when you're dealing with insensitive comments from other people. Derek mentioned that some family members made hurtful remarks about your situation. Can you tell us about that? Uncle Bill shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I'm not sure we need to get into that tonight." "No, I think it's important that we address these issues directly. Derek told you that I made some very hurtful comments about your layoff, didn't he?" The table went completely silent. Derek's face had gone pale. "Uncle Bill, can you tell everyone exactly what Derek said I said about your job situation?" Uncle Bill looked from me to Derek, clearly realizing that he was in the middle of something much more serious than a family appreciation dinner. "I don't think this is the right time." "I think it's exactly the right time, because I want everyone to hear Derek's version of what I said, and then I want to ask when exactly I said these things to him." Derek finally found his voice. "Monique, what are you doing? This is supposed to be a nice family dinner." "It is a nice family dinner. We're sharing stories about family support. Ruth, would you like to share how Derek has been supporting you?" Ruth, who understood what was happening, looked at Derek with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. "Derek has been very attentive. He visits regularly and helps me with various things." "Like what kinds of things?" "Well, he brings me the monthly support checks from you and makes sure I write proper thank you notes." Derek stood up abruptly. "I think there's been some confusion here. Maybe we should talk about this privately." "Sit down, Derek. We're not done yet." The authority in my voice surprised everyone, including myself. Derek sat. Ruth, can you explain to everyone about the thank you notes Derek asked you to write? Ruth reached into her purse and pulled out the box of cards I had seen earlier. Derek told me that Monique preferred written acknowledgments for her financial support, so I've been writing thank you cards addressed to Derek for the monthly checks. But Ruth, my father interrupted, I thought Derek was the one sending you money. That's what I thought too, Ruth said quietly, until Monique showed me the bank records proving that the money has been coming from her account for over a year. The revelation hit the table like a physical force. My parents stared at Derek in shock while Sarah and Uncle Bill began to piece together their own experiences with his manipulation. Derek's been intercepting my letters to Ruth, I explained calmly, taking credit for my financial support and forging responses to make me think Ruth was receiving my gifts directly. That's not all he's been doing, Ruth added, her voice gaining strength. He borrowed $3,000 from me last month, claiming it was to help pay Monique's medical bills. What medical bills? Carol asked, looking at me in alarm. There are no medical bills. Derek lied about a medical emergency to steal money from our 80-year-old aunt. Derek was staring at his plate, no longer even attempting to defend himself. But I wasn't finished. Sarah, remember how Derek told you I thought your wedding was too expensive. When exactly did I say that to him? Sarah thought for a moment, then shook her head. I don't think you ever did say that. Derek just mentioned it in passing one day. Uncle Bill, when did Derek and I have the conversation where I supposedly called your layoff pathetic? Uncle Bill was quiet for a long time before answering. I don't think you and I have talked about my job situation at all, actually. That's because we haven't. Derek made up those comments to make you think I was insensitive and judgmental while positioning himself as the family member who truly understood your struggles. The doorbell rang, interrupting the heavy silence that had settled over the room. I got up to answer it, knowing that Emma's arrival would provide the final piece of Derek's downfall. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Emma, Derek's girlfriend. Emma walked into the dining room looking nervous but determined. Derek's face went white when he saw her. Actually, Emma said, looking directly at Derek, I'm Derek's ex-girlfriend. We broke up 3 weeks ago when I discovered some disturbing information about his financial activities. Emma, you don't need to do this, Derek said quietly. Yes, I do. Emma turned to address the rest of the family. Derek has been telling me for months that he owned Monique's house and business. He was planning to propose with an engagement ring purchased using Monique's credit card authorization, which he forged. My parents gasped in unison. Credit card fraud was a federal crime far more serious than the family manipulation we had been discussing. There's more, Emma continued. I brought copies of the police report I filed yesterday. Derek has been using my identity to secure loans and credit cards, probably the same way he's been using Monique's name and reputation. She handed me a folder of documents. The police are very interested in talking to Derek about identity theft, credit fraud, and forgery. They asked me to let them know when I found him. Derek stood up so quickly that his chair fell over backward. I need to leave. Actually, Emma said, pulling out her phone, they're waiting outside. Through the dining room window, we could see 2 police cars parked in my driveway, their red and blue lights reflecting off the glass. Derek Thompson. The lead officer had apparently been waiting for Emma's signal before approaching the house. You're under arrest for identity theft, credit fraud, and forgery. As Derek was handcuffed in my dining room, surrounded by the family members he had spent 2 years manipulating and betraying, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, complete and total vindication. The officer read Derek his rights while our family sat in stunned silence, watching as the golden boy who had positioned himself as everyone's savior was led away in handcuffs for crimes that carried potential federal sentences. Ma'am, the officer said to me before leaving, we'll need you to come in tomorrow to provide a statement about the credit card fraud and any other financial crimes you want to report. After they left, the dining room felt like the aftermath of a tornado. My parents sat in shock. Uncle Bill stared at his untouched plate. Sarah held Marcus's hand tightly, and Ruth dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Finally, my father spoke. "Monique, we owe you an enormous apology." "Yes, you do," I said simply. "But more than that, we all need to figure out how to rebuild trust in this family. Derek didn't just steal money and commit fraud. He systematically destroyed our relationships with each other by making us believe lies about people we should have known better." Carol reached across the table and took my hand. "How do we fix this?" "We start by being honest with each other. No more accepting secondhand information about family members. No more making assumptions about people's motivations. And no more enabling people who manipulate others, even when they're family." Emma, who had stayed to provide support during the arrest, gathered her documents and prepared to leave. "I'm sorry your family had to go through this," she said. "But I'm glad the truth finally came out." After she left, we spent the rest of the evening slowly working through the damage Derek had caused. Each family member shared their experiences with his manipulation, and gradually a picture emerged of just how comprehensive his deception had been. But more importantly, we began the process of rebuilding authentic relationships based on direct communication rather than filtered through Derek's distorted version of reality. 3 months later, I was back in my dining room hosting another family dinner. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of the careful politeness that had characterized our gatherings during Derek's campaign of manipulation, there was genuine warmth and honest conversation. Derek had pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges, including identity theft, credit fraud, and elder abuse. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to both Ruth and Emma for the money he had stolen from them. The judge had been particularly harsh about his exploitation of an elderly family member, calling it a betrayal of the most vulnerable kind. More importantly, for our family's healing, Derek's arrest and trial had forced all of us to confront the role we had played in enabling his manipulation. It wasn't easy to admit that we had been so quick to believe the worst about each other, based on secondhand information, but that honesty was exactly what we needed to move forward. "And you know what I keep thinking about," Sarah said, passing the mashed potatoes to Uncle Bill. "How easy it was for Derek to convince me that Monique had changed when really I was just too lazy to maintain our relationship directly." "I did the same thing," Uncle Bill admitted. It was easier to feel hurt about imaginary comments than to actually talk to Monique about what I was going through. My parents had perhaps the hardest journey of all. They had spent 2 years believing that their successful daughter had become arrogant and dismissive, when in reality I had been quietly supporting extended family members without seeking recognition or gratitude. The guilt they felt about doubting me was complicated by their grief over losing Derek, whose manipulation they were only beginning to understand. "I keep wondering if we failed him somehow," Carol said during one of our weekly phone calls. "Maybe if we had been better parents, he wouldn't have felt like he needed to lie and manipulate to get what he wanted." "Derek's choices were his own," I reminded her. "You didn't teach him to steal from elderly relatives or forge credit card applications. Those were conscious decisions he made as an adult." Ruth had moved into my guest room permanently after Derek's arrest, both for companionship and because the stress of his betrayal had affected her health. But far from being a burden, her presence had enriched my daily life in ways I hadn't anticipated. "I spent so many years living alone," she told me one evening as we worked in the garden together, "that I forgot how nice it is to share everyday moments with family." I was thinking the same thing. I've been so focused on building my business that I forgot how important these relationships are. Ruth's recovery from Derek's betrayal had been inspiring to watch. Instead of becoming bitter or distrustful, she had used the experience to deepen her connections with the family members who had proven themselves trustworthy. She had also become an advocate for elder abuse prevention, speaking at community centers about the warning signs of financial manipulation by family members. The extended family had rallied around both of us in ways that demonstrated the strength of our bonds when they weren't being undermined by manipulation. Cousins who hadn't spoken to me in months reached out to apologize and share their own experiences with Derek's lies. The wedding gift that Derek had intercepted from Sarah was replaced with an even more generous contribution to the house fund she and Marcus were building. But the most meaningful change was in our family's communication patterns. We had established new traditions around direct conversation and honest feedback. Instead of accepting information about each other through intermediaries, we committed to addressing concerns and conflicts face to face. "I never want to go through anything like this again," Sarah said during one of our dinners. "The idea that I spent months thinking poorly of Monique because of Derek's lies makes me sick." "The important thing is that we learned from it," I replied. "We know now that relationships require active maintenance and direct communication. We can't take them for granted or assume that other people are accurately representing our words and feelings." Uncle Bill had found a part-time position with a local manufacturing company, partly through connections I was able to provide through my business network. But more importantly, he had regained confidence in his skills and value as an employee. "Derek's lies about your reaction to my layoff actually prevented me from asking for help when I really needed it," he reflected. "I was so hurt by the things you supposedly said that I didn't want to seem weak by reaching out to you." "That's exactly what Derek intended," I said. "He wanted to isolate all of us from each other so he could control the information flow and maintain his position as everyone's primary source of family news. The business Derek had claimed to be planning with the money he intended to steal from me had of course been entirely fictional. The consulting services he had described to Emma were nothing more than fantasy designed to make his request for $50,000 seem legitimate and potentially profitable. But in a strange way, Derek's deception had inspired me to think more seriously about family financial planning. I had established a trust fund to help family members with genuine emergencies, administered through a third party to ensure transparency and accountability. Uncle Bill's job search assistance, Ruth's living arrangements, and Sarah's house fund were all supported through this trust, but with clear documentation and oversight that prevented any single person from manipulating the system. Derek's biggest mistake. Ruth observed one evening, was thinking that family relationships are a zero-sum game. He believed that making you look bad would automatically make him look good, but family love doesn't work that way. He also underestimated how much family members actually care about each other, I added. His lies only worked as long as we weren't communicating directly. The moment we started talking to each other honestly, his whole scheme fell apart. The ripple effects of Derek's manipulation had extended beyond our immediate family. Emma had become a friend, bonding with us over the shared experience of Derek's betrayal. She had also connected us with other families who had dealt with similar manipulation, creating a support network for people recovering from financial abuse by relatives. The hardest part for me, Emma explained during one of our conversations, was accepting that someone I loved and trusted could lie to me so consistently and convincingly. It made me question my own judgment about everything. "That's exactly what manipulation is designed to do," Ruth replied. "It makes you doubt your own perceptions, so you become dependent on the manipulator for your understanding of reality." As the months passed, our family dinners became celebrations of authentic connection, rather than obligations to be endured. We shared genuine updates about our lives, offered real support for each other's challenges, and celebrated successes without the undercurrent of jealousy and resentment that Derek had cultivated. The empty chair where Derek used to sit served as a constant reminder of the importance of honesty in family relationships. His absence was painful, but it was also liberating. For the first time in years, family gatherings felt safe and nurturing, rather than competitive and fraught. "I used to dread these dinners," Uncle Bill admitted during one particularly enjoyable evening. "I never knew what drama Derek would stir up or what criticism would be waiting for me. Now I actually look forward to seeing everyone." "That's because we're finally seeing each other as we really are," I said, instead of through Derek's distorted lens. The legal proceedings had also revealed the full extent of Derek's financial crimes, which went far beyond his manipulation of our family. He had been running similar schemes with former colleagues, ex-girlfriends, and even casual acquaintances, using charm and selective truth-telling to extract money and favors from anyone who would trust him. The detective told me that Derek was what they call a pathological manipulator, Emma shared. Someone who lies so consistently that they start to believe their own stories. He probably convinced himself that he deserved the money he was stealing because he had worked so hard to maintain his image. But understanding Derek's psychology didn't excuse his behavior or minimize the damage he had caused. The family relationships he had damaged required years of careful rebuilding, and some trust could never be fully restored. The most important lesson I learned from the entire experience was the difference between enabling someone and truly supporting them. For years, I had quietly covered Derek's expenses and cleaned up his messes because I thought that was what family did for each other. But my silence about his problems had actually prevented him from facing the consequences of his choices and learning to make better decisions. Real love sometimes means letting people fail, Ruth observed. If we had all been honest about Derek's problems years ago, maybe he would have gotten help instead of getting worse. As I looked around the table at our latest family dinner, seeing the genuine affection and respect that had replaced Derek's manufactured drama, I felt grateful for the painful lessons we had all learned. We were a stronger family because we had survived his betrayal and chosen to rebuild our relationships on a foundation of honesty and direct communication. The trust we had lost when Derek was arrested was being gradually rebuilt through consistent actions and transparent intentions. Family members who had been manipulated into resenting each other were rediscovering the love and support that had always existed beneath Derek's lies. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Sarah said, raising her glass in a toast. "We're finally the family we always could have been, just without the drama and manipulation." "To authentic relationships," I replied, raising my own glass. "To direct communication, honest feedback, and the courage to confront problems instead of avoiding them. And to second chances," Ruth added, "for the people who deserve them." As we clinked glasses around the table, I realized that Derek's betrayal had ultimately been a gift, even though it hadn't felt that way at the time. It had forced us to examine our relationships, improve our communication, and create the kind of family bonds that were strong enough to survive challenges, because they were based on truth rather than convenience. The empty chair where Derek used to sit would always remind us that family love isn't automatic or unconditional. It has to be earned through consistent honesty, mutual respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. But when those elements are present, family relationships become a source of strength and joy that no amount of manipulation can destroy. Looking back now, I can see that Derek's cruelest lie wasn't about my supposed arrogance or selfishness. It was his claim that I was useless to the family except for my money. What he failed to understand was that my real value to the family had nothing to do with my financial success. It was my commitment to honesty, my willingness to support others without seeking recognition, and my determination to fight for the people I loved, even when fighting meant confronting uncomfortable truths about family dynamics. In the end, Derek's plan to kick me out of the family had backfired completely. Instead of isolating me from the people I cared about, his manipulation had ultimately brought us closer together and made our relationship stronger than they had ever been before. The house that Derek had tried to claim as his own had become a true family home, filled with laughter, honest conversation, and the kind of love that grows stronger through adversity. And the money that Derek had seen as his ticket to financial freedom had instead become a tool for genuine family support, administered with transparency and accountability that made manipulation impossible. As our evening wound down and family members prepared to head home, I reflected on how much had changed since that terrible Sunday dinner when Derek had announced his plan to exile me from the family. He had intended to destroy my reputation and steal my resources, but instead he had revealed his own character and lost everything that truly mattered. The lesson I carried with me from that experience was simple, but profound. Protecting yourself from manipulation isn't selfish, it's necessary. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable harmful behavior, even when that behavior comes from someone you care about deeply. Family relationships should be sources of support and strength, not weapons to be used for personal gain. When someone tries to turn your love for family members against you, the healthiest response isn't to try harder to prove your worth. It's to expose the manipulation and insist on authentic relationships based on mutual respect and honest communication. Derek's empty chair would always be a reminder of the consequences that follow when someone chooses manipulation over authenticity. But the filled chairs around our table represented something much more powerful: the resilience of genuine family bonds and the healing that becomes possible when people choose truth over convenience. What experiences have you had with family manipulation or betrayal? How did you handle situations where someone tried to turn family members against each other? Share your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if it resonated with your own experiences. Subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics and overcoming difficult relationships, and share this video with anyone who might need to hear about the importance of honest communication in families. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you recognize and respond to manipulation in your own relationships. Remember, you deserve family relationships built on truth and mutual respect, not fear and obligation.